The woman who had redefined what it meant to be a champion looked like she had lost her way without a competition to win. Serena Williams sat across from Jimmy Fallon in Studio 6B. Her legendary presence somehow diminished, as if the fire that had made her the greatest tennis player of all time was struggling to find something to burn for. The athlete, who had spent her entire life chasing victory, now seemed to be grappling with the terrifying question of what comes next. Jimmy noticed it immediately. They'd been playing Life After Glory, a Tonight Show game where retired athletes discussed transitioning from competitive sports to civilian life. For most guests, it was a chance to celebrate new chapters and inspire others. For Serena, it had become something that looked increasingly like a mourning process for a life that no longer existed. "Serena, here's a question everyone's curious about," Jimmy had said with his usual warmth, though there was obvious reverence in his voice. "You've accomplished everything possible in tennis, 23 Grand Slams, years at number one. Now that you've stepped away from competition, what does it feel like to wake up without having to be the greatest tennis player in the world?" The question should have been liberating for Serena. Here was a woman who had proven everything there was to prove, who had earned the right to enjoy life without the pressure of constant competition. This should have been a celebration of freedom and new possibilities. Instead, Jimmy watched as one of sports' most dominant forces began to quietly unravel. "Jimmy," Serena said, her voice missing its usual commanding confidence. "That's exactly the problem. I don't know how to wake up without that pressure. I don't know who I am when I'm not trying to be the greatest at something." The studio fell silent, sensing that whatever was coming would reveal something profound. "For 23 years, every day of my life had a clear purpose," Serena continued, her voice carrying a weight that surprised everyone. "Win, improve, dominate, prove myself. Now I wake up and what? Make breakfast? Go to meetings? Live a normal life? I don't know how to do normal." The confession hung in the studio air, like an admission that success could be its own form of prison. The audience, expecting inspiring talk about new adventures and well-deserved rest, instead found themselves witnessing something much more vulnerable. Their champion admitting she was lost without something to conquer. Jimmy felt his entertainment instincts immediately give way to deep concern. What does that feel like day to day? Serena looked down at her hands, hands that had gripped tennis rackets for countless hours, raised countless trophies, signed countless autographs. And when she looked back up, her eyes carried something that devastated her: emptiness. "It feels like withdrawal," she said, her voice becoming smaller, more uncertain. "Like I'm an addict who's lost her drug of choice. The drug was adrenaline, competition, the rush of winning, and now that it's gone, I don't know how to feel alive." The cameras continued rolling, but everyone in Studio 6B understood they were witnessing something unprecedented. One of the most successful athletes in history, revealing the psychological cost of stepping away from the only life she'd ever known. Jimmy made a decision that would define this moment. He stood up from his desk and moved to sit directly next to Serena, understanding that this conversation required presence, not performance. "Tell me about that withdrawal," Jimmy said gently. "I wake up every morning and my body expects to train," Serena admitted, her voice carrying the weight of a profound loss. "My mind expects strategy, preparation, the anticipation of battle, but there's nothing, just quiet, and the quiet is terrifying." She paused, clearly accessing feelings she'd been trying to avoid. "Do you know what it's like to have your entire identity tied to one thing, and then that thing is gone? I was Serena Williams, tennis champion. Now I'm just Serena, and I don't know who that person is." Jimmy leaned closer, sensing the depth of the identity crisis Serena was experiencing. When you say you don't know who you are without tennis, what does that mean? It means that for my entire adult life, my worth was measured by wins and losses, Serena said, her voice cracking. My value was determined by rankings and titles. My identity was completely tied to my performance on a court. She looked out at the audience. Take that away, and what's left? I'm 42 years old, and I feel like I'm meeting myself for the first time. And I'm not sure I like who I'm meeting. The audience was completely silent, many beginning to understand how achievement could become both a blessing and a curse. I'll give you an example, Serena continued, tears beginning to form in her eyes. Last week I was at a charity event, just making small talk with people, normal conversation, and I realized I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to be interesting when I'm not talking about tennis. She paused, gathering courage for what came next. Someone asked me what I like to do for fun, and I couldn't answer, because tennis was my fun, competition was my hobby, winning was my entertainment. Without that, I'm just empty. Jimmy felt his heart break for the woman sitting next to him. Serena, that must be incredibly isolating. It is, Serena said simply, because everyone sees retirement as this reward, this well-deserved rest. They say, you've earned the right to relax, but they don't understand that relaxation feels like death to someone whose entire nervous system is wired for competition. Jimmy was quiet for a moment, absorbing the weight of what Serena was sharing. Can I ask you something? Before tennis took over your life, when you were very young, what did you love? Serena looked genuinely surprised by the question. I don't remember. I started playing tennis when I was 3. It's the only life I've ever known. But there must have been moments even within tennis that weren't about winning. Moments that were just about the joy of the game itself. Serena was quiet for a long moment, clearly searching through decades of memories. I remember being 7 or 8 and teaching my younger cousins how to hold a racket. Not because I wanted to beat them, but because I loved seeing them figure it out. Her voice grew slightly stronger as she continued. I remember feeling proud when they'd hit their first clean shot, not because it helped me win anything, but because I'd helped them discover something beautiful. How did that feel? Jimmy asked. Different, Serena said, and for the first time in the conversation there was a flicker of life in her eyes. It felt meaningful in a way that was separate from my own achievement. It felt like I was giving something back instead of just taking. Jimmy leaned forward. What if that feeling could be your new competition? What if instead of trying to be the greatest tennis player, you tried to be the greatest teacher, mentor, or guide? For the first time in the conversation, Serena's eyes showed something other than emptiness. I hadn't thought of it that way. Serena, Jimmy said, can I tell you what I think your real legacy could be? Not the 23 Grand Slams, though. Those are incredible. Your legacy could be the champions you help create, the young athletes you inspire, the barriers you help others break. Jimmy turned to address the audience. How many people in here have been inspired by Serena Williams to pursue something they thought was impossible? Hands shot up throughout the studio, and the applause was immediate and emotional. Jimmy turned back to Serena. You see that? Your impact doesn't end when you stop competing. It multiplies when you start teaching what you've learned. Serena looked out at the response, and something in her expression began to transform. The emptiness was still there, but it was being filled with something else. Purpose. You know what's crazy? Serena said, addressing the cameras directly. I spent so many years focused on my own performance that I forgot about the bigger picture. But maybe the reason I was given these gifts wasn't just to win titles. Maybe it was to prove what's possible, so I could help others believe in their own possibilities. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. I don't know exactly what that looks like yet, but I'm starting to think that retirement from competition doesn't have to mean retirement from impact. Maybe it means expanding the impact beyond just myself. She paused, looking directly into the camera. To any athlete struggling with retirement, or anyone whose identity has been tied to one thing, maybe the end of one chapter is just the beginning of a bigger story. Maybe our greatest victories aren't behind us. They're in front of us in different forms. The studio erupted in applause, but it wasn't typical sports applause. It was recognition, inspiration from people watching someone find their way through a difficult transition. How does it feel to think about it that way? Jimmy asked. Scary but exciting, Serena admitted honestly, because it means I get to discover who I am beyond just an athlete. And maybe that person has even more to offer than I ever imagined. Jimmy stood up and embraced Serena. Not a show business hug, but a real moment of human support and admiration. When they separated, he looked directly at her. Serena, thank you for showing us that champions don't just win trophies. They inspire others to find the champion within themselves. Thank you for helping me remember that my value isn't just in what I've accomplished, Serena replied. It's in what I can help others accomplish. 6 months later, Serena Williams launched a comprehensive mentorship program for young athletes, focusing not just on athletic development, but on building identity and self-worth beyond sports performance. She also began speaking at schools and organizations about transition, resilience, and finding purpose beyond achievement. The woman who had dominated courts around the world had found her greatest court of all, the hearts and minds of those who needed to know that excellence was possible, no matter where they started or what obstacles they faced.